hospitals? Do you get to go quite early, or is it late? Oh, sorry.
An audio issue.
We have an audio. Can you hear me? Everyone hear me?
No, it's online.
Online. Fine.
Internationally.
Okay. So for the medical schools here, so anatomy, how's that for research opportunities? So that you do an intercalated year, is there opportunities to do a PhD? Is there, is the medical school acclaimed as being like one of the top ones in the country? Whatever reason, try to find reasons for it. Usually it'll be on their website for medicine. They'll always put stuff that they're proud about. So it's very easy just to take stuff from there. The next step is the university. So have they got a track record of producing like famous graduates and things like that? Have they got world-class sports facilities and maybe a really into netball or football or whatever? Have they got brand new funding for a brand new library and that'll help you study, things like that. And then finally you can touch on the city. So you can say it's a big city, multicultural, which would help you thrive, or it could be a smaller place, which means you get to know people on a more personal level. It could be closer to home, could be further away from home, could be have good transport links to get back home, could be close to the sea, could be close to a forest. Whatever it is, you can always make a case of how that might help you be a better student. So always try to think of that. So that's one of my tips, is for that. So the frequently asked questions, so it's always worth preparing something that you could say for them. But I would just say have an idea in your head of topics that you can talk about, but don't have a scripted answer that you can just memorize, because they will be able to tell that it's memorized, but it doesn't really come off that good. Next slide. So current issues. So this is worth knowing about. It's worth being aware of the recent news in healthcare. The way that there's a screenshot there, the way that I used it was The Guardian, but you can use whatever news site you want. And I use The Guardian, and if you search The Guardian NHS or Guardian Health, it'll just bring up 2 or 3 articles a day of the big things. So for this, I would just pick maybe one article a day for 5-6 weeks before my interview. And I would just read through it and bullet point with the 10 big things about the article, what are the facts. And then you've got a document there before your interview that you can just refresh your mind through. And you've got an idea of not only the big things, so at the moment we'd be talking strikes, delays in treatments, like waitlist surgery, things like that. So you've got those big things, and you've got a couple of facts that you can sort of drop in your interviews. But you'll also come across some quite niche articles which are worth paying attention to as well. And they can be things like new schemes set up to try and combat maybe a different way to approach cancer or a different way to approach high blood pressure. And those are quite good because you may get asked in an interview, how would you improve the NHS, or what would you do to fix it? And those are huge questions, and no one's going to have the right answer for that. But if you have something that you've read that you can just speak about, it really helps to, 1, calm you down because you know what you're talking about, or you've got something to talk about, and 2, they will have heard all day people go, I'm not really sure. So if you can say something, it really stands out. So hopefully that makes sense. And I've got up there, so weigh up both sides. So no matter what your stance is on an argument, I'd always try and make sure that you know the pros and the cons of for and against, but for strikes and for anything. Because you don't, even if you've got a strong opinion one way or the other, that's fine, but you don't want to show them that you only appreciate one side of the argument. It's worth showing that skill that you can understand both sides. And to do that, you can use the 4 pillars of medical ethics. Now, I'm sure there'll be some of you that have heard that. There might be some of you that haven't heard that. Don't worry. I won't go into it right now, but you can, if you just Google it, it'll all come up and it'll explain it. So the 4 pillars of medical ethics. It's not a crucial thing, but it's worth knowing for your interviews. And then, final, confidence versus stubbornness. So that's just what I'm talking about with don't pick one side of the argument and stick to it. If you come across that you know what you're talking about, but you can be flexible and you can appreciate both sides, and they're confident. But if you can only appreciate one side of the argument and you shut down all the other sides on the other side, then it comes across maybe as a bit stubborn. So we'll avoid that. So yeah. Third section, life as a doctor, as a medical student. So this is quite a common one that can come up at a station for an MMI. And they're going to want to know, one, how are you going to cope as a student, and two, how are you going to cope as a doctor? So for this one, you've got to know insight, you've got to know what it's like as a student and what it's like as a doctor. And then you've also got to know and have reflected yourself as to what works for you. So for stuff like this, like I said before, you can use your university track sheet, as I had before. So you could say, Manchester's a big city with lots of parks, lots of green space, and there's loads of societies at the university, and that would help me relax and de-stress. So that's just one of the examples. This is another screenshot of a document that I got told to read about before my interviews. So it's called The Duties of the Doctor, registered with the General Medical Council. You don't have to read this, so don't worry. But it's in very plain English. You'll be able to understand it. And it's split up into 4 domains. If you have time, it's quite a nice idea just to flick through it and see what there is there. Because again, if you know, for these questions, if they say, what does a doctor involve, what are you expected to do, you can reference and say, well, I know as part of it from reading this, I know that there's a responsibility to teach, I know that there's a responsibility to keep up to date with research, I know there's a responsibility to obviously treat patients, but also treat staff kindly as well. So it's just another tip, it's another tool in your arsenal if you have something that you can reference from this. But yeah, next slide. So work experience is a big one. You might get asked a station explicitly set out for your work experience, and it might say, tell me what you've done and how it's helped you. That might come up. It might not come up explicitly as a station, but you should always be able to work it in to an answer. So again, if you got asked, what does a doctor be involved, you can say, well, when I was on work experience, I saw this and this. The big thing about it is I know that a lot of students are worried how much they've got, and they'll say, I've only done this, is that enough? It really doesn't matter how much you do, and it really doesn't matter to an extent, and it really doesn't matter what you've done it in, it's all about what you've reflected from it. So I'm on placement at the moment, and there's a couple of sixth form students that come in for their work experience. I'd imagine some of you will probably have stuff planned for summer, hopefully, if not, don't worry. My key thing that I would recommend for this is if you go on your university website, any med school website really, they should have a list of attributes that they're looking for in a doctor. And that could be inquisitive, compassionate, enthusiastic, all sorts of generic things. If you can print off a list of that or write down a list of that and keep it with you when you go on your work experience and make a note for each of those things, something that you've seen that links to that, it really helps you to take in more when you're there, because otherwise it can feel a bit daunting and stuff's going on and you've got no idea what you're seeing. So like I say, it doesn't matter what you've done, it's what you've seen when you're there and what you've reflected on it, and how, from what you've seen, how is that going to change you as a student, how is that going to make you a better med student. And that's what they're trying to get at with that station. And yeah, you'll always be able to work into most questions. But if you have multiple things for the same station, try incorporate different work experiences you've done. So you don't say the same example for question 1, question 2, question 3 if you can avoid it, if that makes sense. But yeah, role play stations. So these are a bit daunting, I won't lie. I was a bit nervous about these when I first went for my interviews. Has anyone looked at this before? Anyone heard of this? A few people are nodding, yeah. Some of you might not have done, so don't worry. What will happen is, to explain it to those that don't know, is you probably get a briefing before the station. So I had a few. So one of them was in Aberdeen, and it said, yeah, I think it was in Aberdeen, and it said, you've been asked to go see that you're on a flight, you're flying, and you see an elderly woman sat across from you who's clearly nervous of flying. please go and speak to her and try to calm her down. So it's quite a difficult one because you think, oh, what do I say for this? And a lot of people will just panic and don't know what to do. In my opinion, it really is just as simple as just trying to be nice and just trying to be friendly. If you just smile, if you say, are you all right? Is there anything I can get you? My name's so-and-so. I'm also scared of flying. What can I do for you? Just things like that, and just reiterate it. It really boils down to just trying to be nice, trying to be compassionate. They're not expecting you to, prescribe some sort of medication that will make her less anxious. That's not what they're getting at. So just think, if you're finding it difficult, everyone else probably is finding it difficult. So try not to let it get to you, and just take a moment and then just think of the basics. Just smile, be friendly. Like I said, use what you've learned or seen or done in your work experience if you can. A lot of the role play stations aren't medicine specific. So to give you another example, at Manchester, we had a station on, you had to go and it said, your sister's going away next Monday. She's flying away on holiday, but she feels ill with something. And she's asked you to go and get a GP appointment for her before she goes away. So you go to the GP, and there's an actor who's pretending to be the receptionist, and she says, I've not got any appointments for you. And then it's how you negotiate that situation. So I think the correct way for that one, it's probably not going to come up, but just to give you an idea, is to think other things. So because I've been reading those articles, I had a rough idea of what other things she could go and access that GP appointment for. So I said, is there any other GP practices nearby that could offer it? Is there a walk-in centre nearby? Is there any telephone appointments available? Is there any cancellations that you could put it down for? And if she just kept saying no, then you can say, that's fine, thank you for your time. I don't think they're wanting you to say, no, you must see my sister, and start trying to go down that route. But hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, next slide. So other potential stations. So I only had a few of these. Calculation stations, I didn't get any of these, but I know some students are quite worried about them. From my understanding, they're not going to be anything above your level, okay? It's just the stress that will get to you and maybe make you make a mistake, as opposed to it being too complicated for you to do. I don't think they're really done anymore, but maybe someone who's done it can tell me. If it does come up though, just listen carefully. If you don't understand or you want them to repeat it, just ask them, can you repeat it? I didn't understand, and that's completely fine. You're not going to get marked down for that. Current scientific knowledge. So this, you're all at an advantage because you've done your essays. But I got asked somewhere, I forget, can you tell me a condition that you saw in your work experience that you went and researched further? And that's the one that I stumbled on, and I just waffled, basically. But because you've done your essays, you've all searched the topic, you've all looked at it, you can say, well, I applied for this competition, I read about this, I wrote about this, and I learned this and this and this, and etc. So you should all be fine with that. So maybe just have a glance at your essays before you go into your interviews. And a mock PBL station. Does everyone know what PBL is? A few people shaking, that's fine. So that is, you'll see that on when you look at the university specifically, they'll say how they learn. So it's normally either PBL, which is problem-based learning, or lecture-based. So lecture-based is you come in Monday to Friday, and they've just got a series of lectures, and they'll run through them, and you've just got to come and write down the notes. PBL is what they do at Manchester, and what they do at a lot of unis is you come in on a Monday, and they split you into groups. There's maybe 12 of you or 10 of you, and you work through a case each week. So 1 week's case might be on, like it was mentioned before, like a stroke, and it'll be like a history of a patient. So it'll say, Shelley was a 80-year-old woman, worked as this, one day she noticed these symptoms, went to A&E, this happened, started on this treatment, and it'll just outline the whole story. So you read that, and then as a group you decide, it's called problem-based learning. So as a group you decide questions that you need to go away and answer during the week. So it could be, what is a stroke? What's the treatment for a stroke? What investigations do you do for stroke? Why has she had a stroke? And And then the uni put on some lectures to help you answer the big questions. But you've got a week to sort of go away and answer those questions, and then you come back on the Friday and you discuss as a group what you found out. Does that make sense? That makes sense. Fine. So at Hull York, they actually had a mock PBL session as one of the stations in the interview. So I was there with, I think, 12 other people interviewing, and we were just had to talk about something. So these are quite daunting because no one wants to dominate the group. But if you don't say anything, then you've got nothing for them to mark you against. So you've got to say something. My big piece of advice is try to build on something that someone else has said. So instead of cutting the subject off and interjecting with your own point, you can say, like, in addition to what you've said, or further to what you've said, or building on what you've said, I also think this would be relevant. And it just, for the examiner who's going to be there seeing hundreds of students a day, if they just hear that line, in my mind anyway, it shows that you're contributing as a group and working together. So that's the main thing that they're looking for in those sort of stations. And then the final one, at Sheffield, I had a station on 20 questions. Do you guys know 20 questions the game? It's where the interviewer says, I'm thinking of either an object, an animal, a place, or something else. You have 20 questions, yes or no questions, to find out what it is. So that was a bit of a strange station for me. But that one, again, it's all about your thought process. It doesn't matter if you get there in the end, but it's just, can you think logically and narrow down stuff with each question? And you're not, for example, on question 1 going, is it a dog? And then going, is it in Europe? Or things like that. So it's just all about your question, your thought process. So the final thing on this one is, for any station, it matters what you say, but equally important, it matters how you say it and the structure that you use. And that is probably what's going to distinguish people apart, is how you can frame your argument and how you can set the scene for your examiner. Because you've got to think they're hearing the exact same answers for the most part all day. So if you can present it quite clearly, that is the key thing. And the way that you get better at structure is just keep practicing. You can practice with friends, you can practice with family, you can practice to yourself in the mirror, you can practice with anyone at any time, really. So, like I was saying, how to prepare practice. I've got all your emails, so I can send this out. But if you search on Google medical school interview questions, there's a website called ISC Medical, and they must have 150 questions, and they break it down into those sections. And there's just loads and loads of questions. And I went through pretty much all of them, and I would only say, I had 4 interviews, and I would only say I maybe had 5 questions that didn't come up or weren't somewhat related to those questions. So I didn't write down any practice answers, any model answers for each of them, but I had, if that came up, I knew I had certain things that I could talk about, whether it was something in the news or something that I saw on my work experience or something from any of the documents that I showed you. So it just helped me have some sort of confidence going into it. So yeah, next slide. And then the next slide is how to prepare. So I've sort of referenced these throughout. These were the 5 things that I would recommend that worked for me. It's probably a bit overkill, to be honest. I know people that did none of this and got in, so don't worry. But if you know the 4 pillars of medical ethics, if you know healthcare news, like what's going on, arguments for it, your university fact sheet is what I spoke about with the medical school, the university, and the city, the duties of the doctor document, and your work experience. Just make sure you've reflected on your work experience and you know examples of what you've seen and why that's useful. And it doesn't, I would try and say, pick things that are unique to you if you can. So for my work experience, I managed to get a day in theatre, and I spoke about the fact that when I was there, they had music playing, and staff were dancing, and some staff were having a sing-along, and that just helped to relax everyone, which is, obviously you'll all find your own unique and niche things, but I would say use stuff like that as opposed to, I saw a doctor and they were really caring, and that's what inspired me to be a doctor, because although that's nice, it's quite generic, and you're not going to stand out from someone else. So yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. I think that's Yeah, so I think that's the end of my slides. You all got my email, that's another email. But does anyone have any questions?
Should we clap for Josh first?
I'm sure you guys have loads of questions because earlier you asked me so much interview stuff, but I mean Josh did cover quite a lot in there.
Hopefully that all makes sense. Any questions? There's no wrong questions, no stupid questions.
During interviews, can I ask you a question about your A-level subjects and tell you to pick a topic and you just explain it to them?
I didn't have that, but I think it kind of depends where you apply to. I know it's slightly different if you're thinking like Oxford, Cambridge, that they generally do interviews slightly different and they want you to be above the normal level in certain subjects. So I applied to Manchester, Aberdeen, Sheffield and Hull York, and they were all, I didn't get any of that really. The biggest thing I got was, like I said, about tell me about a condition that you've seen and how you research it further, what do you know about it. If you get asked that, you've always got to think smartly of, even if you didn't see any work experience, but you've seen it in your essay, you can kind of get away with it there. I didn't come across anything like that.
Yeah, just to add that, it really depends on the university you apply to. Like Josh said, Oxbridge, London unis, but that's not to say Manchester won't ask you that. But I'm just saying it's quite unlikely. Yeah. But if they do, if they said, tell me something you find interesting in your A-levels, you probably all will research some sort of medical illness or medical disease for your personal statement. So you could just talk about that, I know a guy who was talking about sickle cell anemia and they asked him a question like that and he just spoke about sickle cell. So just have something, I would say, just prepare one or two things.
I'd say any question like that or any other question where you just frozen and you don't know what to say, just give yourself 5 seconds, 10 seconds, saying that's a great question, I'm just going to think about that. Because you don't want to jump in straight away with, I'm going to talk about something in chemistry that we did talk about yesterday, and then as you're explaining it, you go, actually, I don't really know what it is. So if you just take a moment at the start and make sure you pick the right thing to go into, if that comes up.
I just had a few tips as well to say to you guys about structuring your answers, because I think a lot of things into, so what James said earlier is that, in the first 10 seconds you can tell if they're a good candidate or not. And I think the way you do that obviously is by your initial presentation, dressing smart, saying hello, but it's also about the way you structure your answer. So have anyone heard of the STAR structure for answers? Probably not, no. So I think this is a good way. So basically, if you guys want to write it down, you're more welcome to. So S stands for situation, T is task, A is action, and R is result. So you might be thinking, when do I use that? So if I say to you, tell me a time you showed teamwork. Priyanka, tell me a time that you've shown teamwork. Okay, so the situation was that she was planning a conference. What were you tasked to do? Yes, run the poster competition online. And so what did you do? She took them into a side room, she planned that ahead of time, that she would blah, 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 arrange a Zoom call to facilitate that process. And what was the result? It all went smoothly. So something like that. I mean, obviously it'd be a bit more rehearsed, but does that make sense? So any question you're asked, so tell me a time you've shown leadership, tell me a time you've shown teamwork, tell me a time that you've shown caring nature. Start. That is what you should be going for. And then the other structure, that doesn't work for everything. That's just for examples. Is that PEEL? So you guys probably know it in English, point, evidence, explain, link. So anytime, tell me what makes a good doctor, what's your point, what's the evidence that makes a good doctor, and then link it back to yourself. So, something like teamwork makes a good doctor. Evidence, when I was a work experience, I witnessed surgery and it wouldn't have gone ahead if the whole team weren't working cohesively. Link, I play netball with the team, so I have effective team working skills. Does that make sense? So, PEEL and STAR. That was just a side note, I thought.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really, really good. Structure is, I think half of it is what you say in terms of if you've got any great knowledge or great examples. And then the other half of it is literally structure. It is, you just got to think it's a bit annoying, but those examiners are probably seeing at least 30, 40 students that day. And a lot of the answers will be, just because they're the same questions, the answers are going to be quite similar. So you've got to think of ways that you can make that answer different. You don't have to make every single answer amazing and unique, but just having a couple that make you stand out does go a long way.
Any more questions, guys? Pat?
Would you prepare a panel interview the same way as MMI, or do you think they'll be different?
I think probably a lot of the questions would come up with the same sort of questions. I generally prefer MMI interviews because, just another tip, but generally on this, is if you have a bad station on an MMI, no one's going to know about it other than that examiner, so you can kind of just come out of it, try and wipe yourself, and then go into the next one fresh. For panels, I believe it's sort of like you could spend a much longer time with just those interviewers. So I would prepare the same way in terms of the same questions that are probably going to come up.
The only thing in a panel is they might just probe you a bit more, so more time. You know, generally be like an hour and a half interview, whereas then might be 7 minutes. So you might want to develop your answers a bit more, but I think as Josh said, just prepare in the same way, but you know, maybe if you're practicing with your friends, get 3 of your friends to watch you say the answer instead of just 1, so you get used to that feeling of 3 people staring at you while you're answering the question.
I had something to say and I've forgotten it now. The other thing is, just general tips, is for MMIs, they will say outside the room, they'll give you a briefing, and it could just say this question, it might give you loads of details, say this question is going to, this station is based on upcoming junior doctor strikes, or it might just say this station is based on your motivation to study medicine. Always use that minute or 90 seconds that you have to get the structure in your head so you know exactly what you're going to say when you walk in that room. Don't just read the question and then start like thinking, oh, how can I improve on that station or start daydreaming, because those are the seconds that count.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions? No? You're already tired now, I imagine. It's been a long day. Cool.
No more questions?
Are you sure, guys? Yeah, oh, last minute to get to. I will run up so you get to use the microphone.
My question was just in terms of PBLs, if
You're not living local to that city, is there an online opportunity to do that, or would it require you to do a lot of travel?
Is this PBL for like an interview station or whilst you're at medical school?
During an interview.
During interviews, yeah. That's a great question. So I did my interviews before like COVID and hybrid area kind of thing. I don't know how it runs online. It could feasibly work online, because they would just put you in like a breakout room with all of the students. It was only at one uni that I know that happens though, so unless you're applying to Hull York, I won't worry about it too much. But just have a look at whatever unis you're applying to. They will say like what the interview consists of. And I know at Sheffield, they even put on their website like the first 2 stations, these are the questions that you will be asked. So it's always worth having a look at their website and make sure you know the details.
So is it only like a minute and a half you get between each mini interview?
Around that, yeah. It might be a minute, it might be 2 minutes, but it will pretty much just be like, you might get a rest station. If there's like 8 stations, they might throw in a rest one. But yeah, it's only about a minute normally. And they'll normally have like loads of staff members around to help you like make sure you're in the right place at the right time. But yeah, my other just general advice, like everyone is really stressed about interviews and it makes sense. But just try and be like, I know it's easier to say than it is to be, but try and be as relaxed as you can, as smiley as you can, as friendly as you can. If you finished early in the station, I would just say like to the examiner, like, have you had a long day? Just try and be a little bit chatty because everything counts really. And going back to the main thing is just trying to show that you're a nice person. It's fundamentally that is what they're there for.
Any final questions?